On a sweltering summer morning in downtown Los Angeles, William Foster sits in traffic, slowly losing his mind. To all appearances, he's a totally average working schlub, just making his way to the job surrounded by the chaos and noise of the city and a million other people all trying to do exactly the same thing. It's claustrophobic, it's oppressive. The frustration and senselessness of the situation slowly reaches a crescendo in Bill's head until, finally overwhelmed, he abandons his car. One of the drivers behind him starts shrieking at him, but Bill barely seems to hear him. "I'm going home," he shouts over his shoulder. If only it were so simple. So begins Bill Foster's working day odyssey to return to his family and to his home, the story of which is told in the 1993 Joel Schumacher film, Falling Down. On his way home, Bill will encounter all of the trivial faults of American life. Bad manners, shitty fast food, deceptive advertising, but also other problems that are not so trivial. And slowly, by degrees, Bill will begin to end his cooperation and toleration of all these minor torments. But as he starts pushing back, his rebellion becomes darker, more dangerous, ending finally with a standoff with the police and the iconic lines, "Really? I'm the bad guy? How'd that happen?" How indeed. On its surface, Falling Down isn't a very complicated movie. Bill Foster is a man who's down on his luck, maybe terminally, and one day he reaches his limit and decides he's not going to stand for it anymore. But by the end of the film, he's on the wrong side of the moral line, not to mention the law, and he pays the price. The message was clear. Modern life ain't perfect, but that doesn't give you the right to lose your mind and start blowing up stuff. Simple, right? But there's always something about the final scene when Bill is being confronted by Detective Prendergast. Oh my god, this is going to be a long one. Detective P, and some of the dialogue they exchanged that left me with a bad taste in my mouth. It seemed to go beyond the simple message. It seemed to suggest something that was even darker than Bill's transformation. What I was sensing each time I watched this flick was that there was something moving beneath the surface, that there was a deeper level of analysis that was left largely ignored by everyone, and beneath the surface of that analysis there was something that I didn't like. For years it's bothered me, but I've never actually sat down and tried to unpack why. Until recently. And what I've realized is that while most people look at Falling Down as a fairly simple movie exploring the plights of the little guy, the truth is a little more sinister. But to explain why, we're going to have to get deep into the weeds. If that's not your thing, no problem. Consider this your warning, but if you're still interested, I'm going to show you why Falling Down isn't the movie that you think it is. After abandoning his car, William stops to make a phone call, but when the woman that we assume is his wife answers, he doesn't say anything, and instead he hangs up the phone. He then starts to make another call, but realizes he doesn't have enough money, and so he heads into a convenience store to get change. It does not go well. The shop owner refuses to give him change and insists that he has to buy something. This scene captures so many themes of this movie. During the 1990s, American attitudes towards immigration were extremely negative, possibly the most negative that they have ever been. But while it might be tempting to chalk this scene up to racism, what the conflict between Bill and the shopkeep really illustrates is a collapse of social capital. Social capital is understood as the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. It involves the effective functioning of social groups through interpersonal relationships, a shared sense of identity, a shared understanding, shared norms, shared values, trust, cooperation, and reciprocity. Basically, it's that feeling of being able to leave your door unlocked, or go by your neighbor's place to grab a cup of sugar, or whatever. That's social capital. It's what you get when people trust each other and feel a shared sense of identity and shared values. In the year 2000, 7 years after Falling Down's release, Robert Putnam would publish his landmark study, Bowling Alone, which demonstrated the precipitous decline of social capital in America. William's request for change is the kind of thing that would be a non-issue in a situation with high social capital. Is the kind of low-stakes favor that costs nothing to the shopkeeper, but the man refuses. Foster tries to buy a Coke, but the price is too high.
I understand.
85 cents, 85 cents.
85 cents? That doesn't give me enough money for the phone call.
The argument quickly turns to cultural issues, with Foster complaining that he can't understand the man's accent.
What's a phi? I don't understand a phi. There's a V in the word. It's five. They don't got V's in China.
Not Chinese. I'm Korean.
Whatever, you come to my...
Not only do these men not share any ethnicity, they only barely share a common language. The confrontation escalates and the shopkeep goes for a bat, but Foster gets the better of him and takes it. He calls the shop owner a thief for charging 85 cents for a soda and begins walking through the store complaining that each of the products is too expensive and comparing them to previous pre-inflation prices, and then destroying the merchandise when the owner tells him the real prices.
I'm rolling back prices to 1965. What do you think of that? Donuts. Package of 6, how much?
$1.12.
Oh! Too much.
But of course, this guy isn't the reason that these goods are more expensive. It's because of policy decisions made by people in positions of power and influence. Foster's statement about pre-1965 prices is almost certainly a reference to the Great Inflation, a period between 1965 and 1982 in which exceptionally bad monetary policy caused the largest and most consistent rise in the rate of inflation in the country's history. After banging up the guy's shop, William gets him to agree to sell the fucking Coke that started all of this for 50 cents. He pays, takes the change, and leaves, taking the bad with him. On the way out, he says, "It's been a pleasure frequenting your establishment."
It's been a pleasure frequenting your establishment.
And what's interesting is that this isn't some 80s style one-liner to really rub it in this dude's face how badly he just got owned. In some sense, Bill really means it. Or he wants to mean it. This line ironically contrasts the scene that's just unfolded with the ideal that Foster longs for. He wishes for a world where saying this on the way out would make sense. This is the kind of world he longs to return to, but you're missing part of the picture if you don't see that Bill himself would be out of place in that world. This isn't a natural sentiment for him. It's a cope. It's a LARP. He tries to make his call again, but the line is busy, and he resumes walking. As these events are happening, we're also introduced to Detective Prendergast, played by the incomparable Robert Duvall. Prendergast is about to retire from the force. In fact, today is his last day on the job. In any movie, this is basically a promise to the audience that this dude is gonna die, and it's refreshing that the film acknowledges this trope, with all of Prendergast's colleagues continually referencing his impending death, despite the fact that he's intended to spend the entire day behind a desk. Far from being some cardboard cutout, though, Prendergast is a strange inversion of the cliched cop stereotype. He's even kind of disliked because of it. In fact, his captain, who actually is that stereotype, explicitly despises Prendergast.
I've never liked you. You want to know why? You don't curse. I don't trust the man.
On top of that, Prendergast is a man whose life has been touched by tragedy. He lost a child some years ago, and his marriage is an unhappy one. Over the course of the movie, we learn that his wife was once a beautiful woman. But as her beauty faded, she became increasingly needy and neurotic. She's the reason that Prendergast is retiring early and going to some rural backwater, even though it means he won't get his full pension. She doesn't like his job and is afraid that he'll be hurt. But this understandable concern has grown too intense, and she's begun to smother her husband. She calls his office throughout the day, and we get a sense that Prendergast has to devote a large amount of emotional resources to placating and comforting her, as embarrassing as it is for him.
Feel better?
No, I don't feel better.
London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down.
She's jealous, childish, and whiny, but she can also turn venomous and demanding at a moment's notice. As fate would have it, Prendergast's last day is deeply intertwined with Bill Foster's breakdown. From being caught in the intensified traffic jam that Foster creates by leaving his car, to encountering the shopkeeper, Prendergast is placed in a unique position to identify this string of seemingly random acts of violence as the work of a single man. Speaking of, Bill takes a moment to rest his legs. He's got a massive hole in his shoe and he's covered it up with a piece of cardboard. I don't normally fixate on craft, but this is a good detail in that it subtly foreshadows upcoming plot points. Why would a man with a white-collar job be walking around in badly worn-out shoes? It hints that there's something more happening here than it initially seems, but only if you stop to think about it for a second. The movie itself draws no more attention to it. As he sits, Bill is accosted by two gang members. Here again, Bill is seen as the everyman pushing back against the forces of social decay that have enabled this kind of behavior. Bill agrees to leave the area, but the two thugs demand that he pay a toll and tell him to give them his briefcase.
You should pay a toll.
How about that briefcase, man?
Good idea. Give us your briefcase, man.
This is an odd thing to try to steal. You'd expect them to ask for his wallet. Wallets have cash and credit cards inside. Briefcases just have the substance of a man's work. At this point, we don't know what Bill does for a living, but it seems unlikely that the contents of his briefcase could have that much value to the thieves. The bizarreness of the demand is an indication that the briefcase has to have some kind of symbolic value that we should pay attention to. But what's even stranger is the fact that Bill refuses to part with it.
I'm not giving you my goddamn briefcase.
Whatever is inside is important enough to Bill that he is willing to risk his life for it. One of the guys pulls a knife, but Bill fends them off with a bat that he took from the shopkeeper. After the thugs flee, he throws the bat at one and picks up the butterfly knife. Now, even though I personally think that a bat is a more effective weapon than a butterfly knife, this illustrates the next theme of the film: escalation. Bill stops at another payphone and finally reaches his wife Beth, and we discover just how badly wrong things have gone in the Bill Foster family. He and Beth are divorced, and she has gotten a restraining order against him that's prevented him from seeing his daughter for a long time. Throughout the phone call, Beth is remarkably cold and indifferent, refusing to offer even an ounce of empathy, even though Bill sounds like a man at the end of his rope. He asks about his daughter, and Beth says,
"She's doing just fine without you."
An exceptionally cruel thing to say, unless she has very good reason, and we the audience are left wondering what that reason might be. As they talk, we see that the gang members from before have regrouped with their homies and are on the hunt for Bill. They spot him, and just as Bill is hanging up the phone, they perform a drive-by shooting. The shooting hits a number of bystanders but does nothing to Bill, who barely even seems to take notice. Then the gang crash their car. Bill approaches and finds one of the men who confronted him earlier lying on the pavement, unable to move but still conscious. Beside him is a gym bag full of guns. Bill picks up a submachine gun. "You missed," he says, and attempts to shoot the thief, but he hits the car instead. "I missed too," he says with a slight laugh before relocating and trying again. This time, he hits the man in the leg, and then he takes the bag full of weapons and just walks away. He continues towards home only to have his progress blocked by some kind of construction work for the second time. At the movie start, the traffic jam was also the consequence of a different construction project which had closed down lanes. When it comes to analysis, once can be chance, but twice is a motif. The construction work presents a real material obstacle in the here and now of the film, but is also a symbol for growth itself. The construction that Bill encounters isn't an expansion of the city into new areas. It's the kind of construction that has to be undertaken when an urban area's population has exceeded what it was intended for. Like a man loosening his belt after a big meal. The scene then changes to Beth's house, where some police officers are asking her about Bill. The officer inquires about the restraining order that Beth has put on her ex-husband, and she confesses that a judge had encouraged her to get it in order to make an example out of Bill.
Horrendous temper, and I just didn't know if a restraining order was a good idea. But the judge said we should make an example of him.
She then goes on to admit to the officer that Bill had never actually struck her or his daughter. She simply felt like it was possible that he might. "You think?" the officer responds, and an awkward silence swallows the conversation as it's clear that the officer is not entirely convinced that Beth is in the right here. Bill continues on through a park where he is again accosted, this time by a man asking for change. He tells Bill a story about how he's from out of town and has gotten stranded here and just needs a couple of bucks to help pay for the gas to get home. But Bill is having none of it and asks to see the man's driver's license to confirm that he really is from out of town.
Your driver's license.
What do you want to see my driver's license for?
Well, if you're from Santa Barbara, have your address on it, won't it?
I don't have a driver's license.
You drove all the way from Santa Barbara without a
The
license?
man says he doesn't have a license, but Bill keeps pressing him. Eventually, the guy admits that the story was a lie and changes tact to claiming that he's a veteran, but this story falls apart too. He then claims that he just needs something for food because he hasn't eaten in several days, even though he's about halfway through a burger that he's currently holding. Gradually, the entire conversation descends to the man insanely demanding that Bill give him something, anything, for no real reason except that he wants it.
Some money, man. Just give me some money.
No,
How about the change in your pocket? I don't care if it's a dime. Give it to me.
I'm not giving you any money.
You got a cigarette?
I don't smoke.
Oh, come on, man. You got to give me something.
Yeah, why don't you try to...
We see a bizarre inversion of the logic of begging, which has been transformed into a perverse sense of entitlement. The man ends by pointing out that Bill is carrying 2 bags and that fairness, big air quotes around this one, dictates that he should give up one of them.
My car carrying 2 bags. You got 2 bags. I don't got any. Is that fair? Huh? What's in those bags anyway? Huh? Give me one of those bags.
Even though this demand is crazy, Bill, after thinking for a moment, nods and hands him his work briefcase. This is a bizarre change considering that Bill was willing to risk his life for the same briefcase a couple of hours ago. "I don't need it anymore," he says. And the man is ecstatic, but after opening the briefcase, he finds that there's nothing in it except for some chips, an apple, and a crushed sandwich. Rather than carrying important documents of some kind, Bill's briefcase is just a glorified lunchbox. So why did he fight for it before? The answer is that the briefcase was a symbol for the kind of man Bill identified as, a productive, valued member of society. It was part of the identity that Bill has crafted for himself over the years, and his willingness to give it up now is itself a sign of his growing alienation from society and also of the unlikelihood that he will turn back. He's leaving behind this identity. Now, rather than his empty and totally symbolic briefcase, he carries the bag of guns that he picked up from the gangbangers. And unlike his briefcase, the guns are not symbolic. They are pure utility. He carries them for no other reason than that they seem useful. In one of the more iconic scenes in the movie, Bill stops at a McDonald's clone for something to eat. After all, he gave up his lunch with a briefcase. Here, again, there's a tension between the obvious absurdities of contemporary life and the extremes which Bill is willing to go to in order to push back against them. He approaches the counter and says that he wants breakfast, but he's told that he's 4 minutes too late for it. Certainly most, if not all of us, have experienced this frustration. Maybe you even thought about insisting and making a scene. Maybe you even did make a scene, but what you probably did not do was pull out a fucking gun. This last option is the one that Bill goes for, and immediately the restaurant is thrown into chaos. For the first time, a third party is brought into Bill's drama. Up until this point, he's only experienced whatever journey he's on as an encounter between himself and the grotesque failures of modern society. But now, he is introduced to the public of other people who are able to witness him. And what he finds is that even though they should be on his side, after all, being denied something so simple as breakfast because of an arbitrary imposed time limit on when you can order it is imminently ridiculous. Something that should not be accepted, but it is accepted by the people around him. And so Bill's resistance, especially at this pitch, is seen as frightening, even as he tries to reassure them that he's not going to hurt them. Bill isn't antisocial. He is fundamentally pro-social. His enemy throughout Falling Down is the antisocial elements within society, with the signs of decay and the collapse of social capital that have made it increasingly unlivable. The tragic irony is that his crusade against these things is experienced as antisocial by the people around him precisely because they have accepted these absurdities. Bill changes his mind about breakfast and decides to get a burger instead. It's brought to him and he notes how pathetic it appears in contrast to the advertisement. "Can anyone tell me what the problem with this picture is?" he asks, and is met with silence. He turns to the crowd of diners and asks again, and the scene ends as a small boy raises his hand to answer the question. We then cut to a scene in a diner in which Prendergast is explaining his retirement situation to his young and attractive partner. They discuss his wife's frailties and insecurities, and how he's basically been muscled into making this choice before another cop, written to be as unbearably 80s jock as possible, comes and takes the partner away. But before she can leave, Prendergast makes one more thing clear. He loves his wife.
Something about my wife. Maybe I never mentioned it. I love her.
Let's go!
The film then returns to Bill, who is walking by a man who's picketing a bank. He holds a sign that says, "Not economically viable." As the man explains, despite having been a loyal customer for 7 years, he's been refused a loan with the excuse that he is not an economically viable candidate for it. Now, because the man is black, you might miss that he is, in every other regard, visually identical to Bill. Everything, from the white shirt and black pants, to their matching ties, to the pins in their shirt pockets, is meant to demonstrate a connection between these two men. Everyone else is trying to ignore the man with a sign, but Bill continues to observe him as he buys a birthday present for his daughter, a snow globe. The protesting man is picked up by the cops and put into a car, and as the car drives away, it stops for a moment, and the man looks directly at Bill and says, "Don't forget me."
Don't forget me.
And Bill nods sincerely, truly seeing the man. Once again, he is a witness for what other people don't want to see or acknowledge. The veil is slowly being lifted for Bill. Anyway, remember that hole in Bill's shoe? Well, he's finally had enough and stops into an army surplus store in order to replace it. The store is run by a neo-Nazi who shows his colors by intentionally running off a couple of gay men, apparently his only other customers besides Bill. He's been listening to the police scanner all day and has realized that Bill, the man in his store, is the man who's been causing all this havoc. When Prendergast's partner comes into the shop asking if he's seen anyone that fits Bill's description, the man lies and covers for Bill, eventually sending the woman off with a bit of casual sexism. He then tells Bill that he's his friend and walks him back to his private stash and equips him with a rocket launcher. Bill wants to know why this man is helping him, and he realizes that it's because the man assumes that Bill is on a racial rampage, killing minorities.
I'm with you. We're the same, you and me.
"We're the same, you and I," he tells Bill. But Bill quickly disabuses him of this notion.
We are not the same. I'm an American. You're a sick asshole.
He then tries to leave, but the neo-Nazi pulls a gun on him, suddenly directing even greater hatred than he has for minorities onto Bill. He goes through Bill's bag, finding the snow globe and breaking it.
What is this doing in there?
He then, attempts to rape Bill, while telling him to imagine that he is being raped in prison by a black guy. It's It's an uncomfortable scene. It's uncomfortable even talking about it. Bill uses the butterfly knife that he still has, stabbing the man in the shoulder. He then gets a gun and shoots the man dead. It's worth noting that the neo-Nazi is the only person that Bill intentionally kills in the entire movie, and the purpose of this scene is to explicitly differentiate Bill from Nazism. He's not out on some racial vendetta, and he doesn't believe in their cause. He just wants to get home. He calls his ex-wife again, and this time the conversation is notably creepy and threatening. And again, it seems like the film wants to create confusion as to whether or not Bill is a good guy who's going through something or a villain. Obviously, this uncertainty is intentional, but it's also forced and unconvincing. This Bill doesn't feel like an organic evolution from the Bill that we saw earlier in the film. He feels like the writers are now leaning on his character to make him behave unnaturally. Bill leaves the store now dressed in black military fatigues, visually indicating the changes that he is undergoing, and for the third and final time, his path is blocked by construction. A lazy-looking construction worker tells him that he's going to have to go around, but this time Bill doesn't turn aside. He demands to know what's wrong with the street.
See, I don't think anything's wrong with the street. I think you're just trying to justify your inflated budgets. What are you, nuts? No, I know how it works.
And the other guy is dismissive at first, but when Bill flashes his piece, he becomes frightened, and eventually admits that there's nothing wrong with the street, and that Bill is essentially correct. Bill tells him that he's going to give him something to fix and pulls out the bazooka and blows up the construction site. Prendergast has now managed to identify Bill and has tracked down his home address. They find out that Bill now lives with his mother, whom they visit, and Prendergast sees that Bill's father, also named William, was a decorated soldier who even received a Purple Heart for being injured in the line of duty. Bill's family has personally sacrificed for their country. He discovers that Bill is an engineer, building weapons that were used to protect Americans during the Cold War. Prendergast then gets his partner to call the company, and they find out that Bill was fired a month prior. When we catch up to Bill, he's passing through a fenced-in golf course, and a couple of older men become enraged by his desecration of their club. One of them is so irate that he attempts to hit Bill with his drive. Bill ducks the ball but comes back up with a shotgun and confronts the man for this horribly greedy waste of resources.
You should have children playing here. You should have families having picnics. You should have a goddamn petting zoo.
He shoots the men's cart, and it rolls down into the lake. Now, the man who had tried to hit him begins to have a heart attack, and Bill asks what he needs, and the man says, "My pills." "Where are your pills?" Bill asks, and the man gestures to the cart that is currently sinking into the lake.
Well, I guess you're out of luck, aren't you? Now, aren't you sorry you didn't let me pass through your golf course? And now you're gonna die wearing that stupid little hat. How does it feel?
The next station on Bill's journey is a beautiful mansion, with an expansive lawn and a large swimming pool. He finds a family there, but realizes that the man is just a caretaker, sneaking his family onto the premises to show them a nice time and give them a taste of the luxury that exorbitant wealth can provide. Will asks what the owner of the house does, and the man tells him that he's a plastic surgery. He's a plastic surgery. Bill confesses, likely for the first time, that he lost his job.
I lost my job. I'm overeducated, underskilled. Maybe it's the other way around, I forget. And I'm obsolete.
Bill finally realizes that the family is afraid of him.
What do you think? You think I want to hurt your family? I have a family of my own.
And we see the toll that this transformation is taking on Bill. He's reaching his breaking point and beginning to fantasize about oblivion and possibly taking his family with him.
And then when it got dark, we'd all go to sleep together. We'd all sleep together in the dark. And everything would be just like it was before.
Here, again, the writer's touch is far from being light. This monologue is here for no other reason than to try to give some plausibility to the movie's ending. Finally, Bill completes his journey back home, but his wife and daughter flee from their house and go out to the pier. You'd think that this is an obviously stupid idea, and it is, but whatever, it's a plot device meant to isolate the film's finale. Before he follows them, Bill stops in his old home to watch some home videos. In the videos, he finally confronts himself, seeing that he has sometimes been mean to his daughter and his wife. The film is clearly trying to draw some kind of parallel between Bill's prior dickish behavior and the events of today, but it falls completely flat in that regard. One way in which it does work, though, is when we see a scene in which Bill is trying to get his daughter to get on a play horse.
Put her on the horse. There we go. Horsey ride.
She doesn't want to, and Bill begins to lose his temper. He starts cursing and complaining about how he bought her the damn horse, so she needs to cooperate. And Bill, in the current moment, lowers his eyes in shame, realizing somehow that the same sickness with which he struggled today was in him too, even in his relationship with his daughter. On the pier, Bill holds his daughter and his ex-wife tells him that he needs help, that he's sick. "You want to see sick?" he asks. "Take a walk around this town, that's sick." At this point, Prendergast intervenes, lulling Bill into a false sense of security and then helping the ex-wife and daughter to get away. He then tells Bill that he, as in Bill, was going to kill his wife and daughter.
What are you gonna do?
I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Oh, guys like you always say you don't know what you're gonna do until you do it. I think you know exactly what you were gonna do. You were gonna kill your wife and child.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like I said, this has no other setup other than the bit of dialogue at the plastic surgeon's house. Understandably, Bill reacts with confusion.
I'm the bad guy?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Prendergast tries to persuade Bill to turn himself in, but Bill refuses. He's gone too far and has nothing left to return for. He tells Prendergast that he's still got a gun. "Let's draw," he suggests. It's perfect. Showdown between the sheriff and the bad guy. It's beautiful. Prendergast tries to talk him out of it, but Bill draws on him, and only after Prendergast has shot him does he realize that it was just a toy water pistol. But Prendergast wipes a splash of water from his face as Bill says, and says with a smile, "I would have had you," before he falls into the water below. Prendergast then returns to Beth and her daughter. There are children gathering outside their house. The birthday party guests have arrived at last. Beth asks him if she should tell her daughter what happened to her father, and he says to let her enjoy the birthday party. The camera follows one of the police officers into the house, and then peels away, entering the living room where the home videos that Bill had been watching are still playing on the TV. It zooms into some footage of Bill and Beth and their daughter gathered happily into the shot. A happy American family that has now come to ruin. And only one question remains. Who's to blame? No analysis of Falling Down would be complete without some discussion of literally me characters. As far as I can tell, the whole phenomenon really took off in 2018 with this meme. It shows a skinny, bespectacled teen on his computer looking at an array of iconic anti-heroes and claiming, "Wow, this is literally me." Now, if you're simply going off of this image alone, you'd assume that the intent here is simply to kind of mock the lack of self-awareness of the kid who doesn't seem to see that he is in no regard like these men. But that's kind of a weird objection if you think about it. We don't usually expect teenage boys to have the same qualities as men in their late 20s and 30s. That's sort of what those years are used for. There's another version of the same basic concept that showed many of the same characters with text reading, "You missed the point by idolizing them." And here the matter is laid bare. The point being made is that these characters are not meant to be identified with. They are, above all, not meant to be treated as aspirational. They were meant to entertain, as part of the entertainment industry. But if removed from the playpen of fictional stories, they're meant to be viewed with suspicion and fright. They are meant to be threatening, because they are. They are dangerous. The problem is, they're also really fucking cool. Some people are prone to complaining about how these characters have been romanticized in popular culture. A complaint to which I say, that's because they're romantic, idiot. That's what the word means. And in recent years, the very attractiveness of these characters has become a problem. And that's why there's been a fair amount of controversy surrounding the growing interest in these characters, especially among young men today. People who write for publications like The Daily Star are very, very concerned about the rise of literally me characters. For as often as people like to say, "Relax bro, it's just a movie," many of these same people seem to be very troubled with these movies and these characters and the fact that lots of men, especially young men, are connecting with them. But what's the problem here? Why isn't this just another just a movie situation? The answer to that question lies in the nature of literally me characters and the reasons why people relate to them. What is a literally me character? Obviously, you'd assume that it's a character that viewers identify with in some special way, or to a greater degree than normal, but that's a pretty bad description. After all, nearly all movie protagonists, if they're written at all well, are easy to identify with. Otherwise, the audience isn't likely to care too much about their story and the movie's going to fall on its face. What makes literally me characters unique is what it means to identify with them, what a person is identifying with when they identify with a literally me. In addition to all being male, what these characters have in common is that they have all placed themselves outside of mainstream society in a radical way. They don't care about conventions or manners or the sensibilities of white women. They are openly hostile or at the very least indifferent to the dominant culture. And on its own, that wouldn't be such a threat. After all, every blockbuster baddie and Hollywood terrorist is equally antagonistic to the mainstream culture. And we don't actually find them that threatening. They're outsiders, only there to get knocked down to affirm the righteousness of the cause. But the literally me is an insider, a native son, and he's gone off the reservation, so to speak. He's seen what society has to offer, and he said, not good enough. This immediately makes him subversive to that social order. His rejection points the way to alternatives, other ways of being. The most compelling literally me characters may even have their own vision of those social alternatives.
God damn it, since when is Project Mayhem about murder?
The buildings are empty. Security, maintenance, all our people. We're not killing anyone, man. We're setting them free.
And usually, these movies are meant to persuade viewers that those alternatives ought to be rejected. The literally me is meant to either be reconciled with society or die because he won't be. And that's what people mean when they say you miss the point. You miss the intent of the movie makers. But at the same time, the people who say this have kind of missed the point themselves. These characters are usually responses to some force in society that is alienating for them. Maybe it's the bland corporate nihilism of office work, or the barely contained barbarism of modern life, but each of these characters represents a response to some failure in society. They are the embodiment of a critique, and the typical purpose of the film is to absorb and refute that critique. William Foster isn't your typical literally me character. Unlike Tyler Durden or the driver, no one is in danger of idolizing Bill. For starters, he's not young. He's not romantic. For God's sake, he's carrying pins in his shirt pocket. He's not an idealist, at least not much of one. He's pushing 40 and he's got a family. Or at least he had one. He has a job. Or at least he had one. He's no Tyler Durden, he's just dad. He doesn't mean to rock the boat, he just wants to be on the boat. He might be a dork, but that doesn't make him wrong. And truly understanding this movie means being able to see past the crude manipulations that are intended to turn him into a villain. The critique that Bill represents is a critique of America's culture and its managerial class, and how they have altered society in the name of increasing economic output. His journey is a journey of discovery, leading finally to a question that is never asked, but which is implicit throughout the entire film. What has happened to the American dream? A question which ought to immediately bring to mind another name, Willy Loman. Arthur Miller's 1923 play, Death of a Salesman, forever secured his place in the canon of American literature. The story follows the last days of Willy Loman, an elderly salesman whose life is imploding in a world that has eaten up the best of him and feels content to throw the rest of him away in his twilight years. Willy's tragic flaw is that he cannot understand that the thing to which he has devoted his life, the rat race and the eternal mirage of the American dream, was essentially a hollow con, that the business which he spent the best years of his life slaving away for cares nothing at all for him, and that he is the unwitting author of his own exploitation. Around the same period, Miller also wrote the essay Tragedy and the Common Man, and in this essay he claimed that the nature of tragedy lay in man's refusal to accept his own degradation. The tragic flaw, or crack in the tragic hero, is really nothing and need be nothing but his inherent unwillingness to remain passive in the face of what he conceives to be a challenge to his dignity, his image of his rightful status. Only the passive, only those who accept their lot without active retaliation are flawless. Most of us are in that category. The efforts of the tragic hero to obtain dignity, and the fact that he is destroyed in these efforts, are meant to express a type of injustice in the world. Though Willy Loman is a flawed character, his destruction was, and still is, an iconic condemnation of American consumerism. In a similar way, Falling Down is a story about a man who plays by the rules, does everything right, and ends up losing anyway. He, it would seem, is a perfect fit for the role of tragic hero. His dignity as a man and as a human being have been assaulted by the failures of his society to uphold the promises that have been made to him. But the thing that's funny about Falling Down is that its entire structure is organized so as to undermine this connection. Its entire intent is to defang Bill Foster's tragic critique. Bill is not allowed to be a tragic hero. Though we're meant to sympathize with him at various times, it's clear that in the final analysis, he's the villain. But how legitimate is this changeover? In Bill's final conversation with Prendergast, he tells him that he used to build weapons to be used against foreign threats. You ought to be rewarded for something like that, he says. Instead, they give it to a plastic surgeon. It must surely speak to some kind of social perversion when the person whose work involves catering to people's vanity, carving up bodies to better suit superficial standards of beauty, is rewarded with incredible wealth, while the person whose work protects a nation from threats abroad is rendered incapable of even providing for his own family. Even if the intent of the film is to ignore Bill's points, it's hard to watch to the end of it without coming to some agreement that the society through which Bill has been moving is indeed sick. But what is the nature of this sickness? As was the case with Bill's complaint about inflation, the problems that assail Bill are not inevitable. In large part, they are the results of specific policy choices that prioritize economic growth at the cost of social stability. The construction that has so often impeded Bill's progress is itself symbolic of the economic growth of the country and its economy, but not everyone has been able to enjoy the fruits of this economic growth. Bill is one of those who have been left behind by a society that is increasingly winner-take-all and in which the erosion of social capital makes life increasingly unlivable for the losers. Bill and his father before him represent a certain ethos of patriotism and self-sacrifice, and this is an ethos that has no place in the slick, fluid, universally fungible relations of mega big dick consumerism. Like the man outside the bank, he has been rendered economically unviable, remorselessly, casually cast aside by the same country that once depended on his services. In addition to this, he's lost his family through a messy divorce. California was the first state to legalize no-fault divorce in 1970, and it was not universally legalized until New York adopted it in 2010. In previous times, it had been judged to be against the public interest to allow people to exit the bonds of marriage without either party having betrayed those bonds in a significant way, such as abuse or adultery. Unsurprisingly, this led to a massive rise in the rates of divorce, which was a source of controversy for many years. To make things still worse, Bill is saddled with a restraining order against seeing his young daughter despite no history of abuse and not even the abuse of alcohol. And why? Because some enforcer of an already dubious legal code decided to make an example of him. If Bill's story were simply an isolated case, it might be one thing, but unfortunately Bill is far from being an isolated case. In the 2012 book Coming Apart, sociologist Charles Murray documents the stories of two Americas, working and upper class, over the course of 50 years from 1960 to 2010. The picture that he paints is a disturbing one, as he shows that these two groups have diverged from each other radically, not just financially, but across a wide range of social measures. While the fates of those in the upper and managerial classes have risen consistently, those in the working class have fallen sharply. This fall has included increased rates of divorce, increased rates of crime, increased out-of-wedlock births, increased numbers of people in prison, decreased labor participation, decreased community participation, decreased religiosity, and more. Taken together, one sees the story of Bill Foster writ large, an increasingly unstable society in which families and individuals have to work harder and harder under conditions of greater and greater competition just to stay afloat. Public goods that could previously be enjoyed by everybody as the gifts of a society with high amounts of social capital are increasingly privatized now. If this is progress, it's a very funny sort of progress, in that it looks very much like every historical example of a small group of aristocrats aggregating as much wealth and privilege to themselves as they can. Discussions of social mobility have only hidden this fact behind the idea that supposedly anyone is able to enter this elite caste if only they have the gumption and ability. In reality, though, the chances of being able to do so get smaller with every passing year, a fact most readily seen in the increasing absurdity of job requirements for even entry-level positions and the decreased value of education. Those who are already within this privileged class do everything they can to ensure that their own children are able to stay on the merry-go-round. Rather than relying on a crumbling public education system, they send their children to the best private schools and ensure that they have access to sophisticated preparatory training classes to ensure they do well on admission tests. Bribery is another avenue that is sometimes taken. They lied to me, Bill says finally.
I did everything they told me to. Did you know I build missiles?
Yeah.
I helped to protect America? You should be rewarded for that. Instead they give it to the plastic surgeon, they lied to me.
And he's right. He, like so many others, was sold on a myth of how his country worked. He has grown up with an understanding of America which gives certain assurances. If you work hard, if you do the right thing, you are guaranteed a level of material comfort, stability, and happiness. What is promised is essentially a certain kind of morality. But Bill is beginning to wake up to the reality in which these promises are in fact empty. That America is in fact a place dedicated to maximizing economic growth, and doing so in such a way that it is guaranteed to produce a certain number of losers who are not economically viable. And Bill's complaint is not just understandable, it is undeniably correct. And this means that it has to be answered. And so it is. What follows Bill's declaration of society's sins is a bit of dialogue so bizarre that I'm just going to let it play in full.
Is that what this is about? You're angry because you got lied to? They lie to everybody. They lie to the fish. But that doesn't give you any special right to do what you did today. The only thing that makes you special is that little girl. Now let's go.
In Plato's Republic, he outlines the concept of the noble lie. The noble lie is a kind of foundational myth propagated by social elites, and it has the function of legitimizing the status quo. Falling Down depicts what happens when a non-elite becomes aware of the lie. In many ways, the viewer is intended to identify with Bill. So much of what he pushes back against are things that we ourselves have probably noticed and been irritated by. Rising inflation, fake advertising, con artists, the general unpleasantness of people in urban areas. So it's very interesting that Bill, the audience's avatar, should end up being shot down as a villain. And transforming Bill into that villain is the primary focus of the film's third act. In this act, Bill is recast as an antisocial mad dog, and the audience is prompted to transfer their identification over to Prendergast. Both Bill and Prendergast are men who have taken some lumps in their lives. At the start of the film, Prendergast is the butt of every joke, respected by no one and constantly hangdog to his domineering wife. Like Bill, he too is about to outlive his usefulness to society, in this case by retiring. But as Bill's life falls apart, Prendergast actually improves. He becomes more assertive, both with his wife and with his co-workers, demanding the respect that they have been denying him.
I want to know when the hell you're coming home now!
Amanda, shut up.
This, the movie implies, is the acceptable mode of pushing back. If you're unhappy with your life, what's needed is for you to alter your personal relationships by becoming more active and assertive within them. By the film's end, Prendergast has gotten his mojo back and has even decided that he's not going to retire after all, affirming his continued usefulness to society. But there's a problem with this message. All of the confrontations that Bill has had today also began as simple cases of him asserting himself in personal interactions with other individuals. It's just that the nature of Bill's confrontations pointed to larger social issues rather than to personal ones. Bill's fight with a shopkeeper and with the gang members implicated policy issues regarding economics and immigration. The constant construction points to corrupt incentives within the city's political structure. His realization of his own economic unviability points to perverse incentives in the marketplace. His relationship with his estranged wife speaks to the legal system and its changing priorities. And finally, his recognition of his own failures as a father implicate the entire consumerist lifestyle of America. But none of this matters in the end. It's all brushed aside so that Bill can safely be labeled a maniac and his complaints dismissed as a maniac's complaints. But Bill's transformation into a deranged psycho capable of killing his own daughter is incredibly sloppy. We have basically 3 scenes: his phone call to his ex-wife after killing the neo-Nazi, his bizarre together in the dark line at the plastic surgeon's house, and his calloused response to the dying golfer. And none of these scenes are very good. The dialogue is inorganic and has a distinctly made-for-daytime television feel to it. Generally, this kind of bad writing is a signal that the writer is having to sacrifice realism in order to achieve a plot point, and that's the case here too. But more importantly, this transformation ignores the fact that Bill is essentially pro-social. He's not a mad dog. He has specific complaints against specific aspects of the society he lives in. Furthermore, these complaints are substantial and principled. But the film ultimately conflates these complaints with a generally antisocial and murderous attitude, turning Bill from a fairly reasonable guy asking for fairly reasonable things into a psychopath. And in doing so, it's as if the writers were trying to say, if you started poking around with the system, if you started calling bullshit, if you started asking why your goods are more expensive, or your cities are more dangerous, or your lives are less stable, then you were putting yourself on a slippery slope that would turn you into a psychopath ready to murder Suey his entire family. The overall effect is to replace the complicated socioeconomic criticisms that Bill's journey has revealed with an extremely simple moral message. You were gonna kill your daughter and ex-wife, and that's bad. By the end of the film, you're supposed to leave the theater, or get up from the couch or whatever, thinking that pushing back against certain social ills is a slippery slope on which one would be better off never taking the first step. If you started complaining about inflation, how long is it going to be before you're a threat to the people you love, and the cops have to come put you down? But if there's anything that can be called progress, it seems to rely pretty heavily on the idea that the individual has an inviolable right to push back against the injustices of society. In the end, falling down isn't meant to support the struggles of the little guy. It's meant to undermine them by associating them with mental illness and antisocial attitudes. It's meant to say to all those whose well-being has been sacrificed on the altar of increased GDP that you don't have the right to take action against whatever forces have done this to you. And the moment that you begin to, the moment that you even begin to think about it, well, you've already become the bad guy.